So, I'm going to walk you through in today's video why the traditional job search doesn't really work and what I've used to get multiple roles and been successful in my approach to the job search, and basically explain a different approach to finding your dream roles. Now, I'm going to focus on tech because that's my area that I work in, and that's the area that we as a company work in to help people. So, right now, if you look at this initial diagram right here, this is kind of the traditional approach to finding a job. All right, very simple. There's you have a resume, you have a cover letter, whatever, standard resume package. And there's everyone else. I put hundreds of people here. If you go on LinkedIn, you'll see that a lot of tech roles get many applications. At least tens of other people are applying, if not hundreds. And what happens is everyone, including you, gets funneled into an initial recruiter screen, the dreaded ATS system, and they filter by keywords or they use some sort of ATS approach in order to filter out a certain number of applicants. So you can see here there's a certain percentage that drop out based off of, your qualifications, whatever. And the important thing to note here is that it is insanely hard for a recruiter to look at your resume and look at everyone else's resume and pick out how your resume is different from their resume. So essentially, it becomes a homogeneous stack where the recruiter is trying really hard to pick out you or someone else from a heap of like hundreds of resumes. So you can obviously see that there's going to be a pretty substantial dropout in this element of the system. And then by some chance you manage to get through this part of the system, then you go on to the hiring manager screen. And again, this is like the same problem. It's really hard for the hiring manager to pick you out compared to everyone else. Really hard to distinguish yourself. And essentially, you're basically leaving up to chance whether or not they pick your resume out of the pile. Now, I'm not saying that it's purely random chance. Obviously, qualifications have some element to do with this, but I think it's pretty fair to say that it is pretty tough for a recruiter or a hiring manager to distinguish you from the hundreds of other people that are applying to a particular role. It is fairly challenging, and especially based off of just like a resume. Pretty hard to pick you out. And again, through this, there is a certain percentage dropout. And then eventually you get to the interview, and if you get through the interview, you get a job offer. Now, what we find is that, for the most part, this is a numbers game. It turns into a numbers game because you can see pretty clearly that the odds that your resume and you get picked out of a stack of like hundreds of other resumes of fairly undistinguishable people, it's hard to pick you out. You're going to find that your chances of getting picked for an interview are fairly low. And that's why you see a lot of frustration and anxiety and just general hatred of the traditional job process, because it is really hard to stand out in a stack of a lot of other people, and quite frankly, it is exhausting, and it requires a ton of energy too. So, all in all, it's really not the most effective way to approach the job search. I mean, yes, can there be success? Yes, I'm not saying no, that there can never be success through this approach. All I'm saying is that it is really hard, really painful, and quite frankly, not a lot of fun. So, we at the Tech Biz Club kind of wanted to provide a different approach to this. we understand that people want to get into, desirable tech jobs. Maybe you want to be a software engineer, or you want to be a product manager, or you want to be a data scientist, or something along those lines. But you don't want to spam hundreds of resumes and then pray that your resume gets picked. We just find that to be a really uninformative and, quite frankly, difficult exercise. So that's why we kind of came up with our different approach. And obviously, this is not just our approach, others have used this as well. But personally, I found for myself that this has been a pretty good way to approach the job search. And I've also used this for internships as well. So, this is a bit of the easier route. And you have to understand what the goal is here. The goal here is to get a hiring manager or the owner of a particular position to take notice of you and say, hey, let's say your name is Sally or Bill or whatever. Sally, let's interview her. Or Bill, let's interview him. And they pick you for the resume. Because the hardest part in the entire process is just getting your resume selected for an interview, getting picked for an interview. Because there's a million guides out there on how to create a resume, how to do well in an interview. You can get hundreds of books on that. It's of so much availability out there on that. But we find personally that the hardest part is actually getting selected for the interview. Like, that's the hard part. And we just want to present a route that I personally have found to be helpful for me. And also, I've seen others apply this and have success in their job search. So we just wanted to present this alternative. And that's why we say it's the easier way. And what we advocate for is networking, warm networking. Now, when people think of networking, they think of things like going to a job fair and handing out 100 resumes and sweatily shaking the hands of hundreds of hiring managers at the job fair and trying, hopefully, for them to take notice of you. And that can be done. It does work for some. But honestly, it's the same thing as just submitting your resume into a stack. Because instead of, just doing it virtually through a computer, you're just doing it in person. And it's really hard, again, to pick out you amongst the hordes of other people who have come and spoken to them at that particular job fair. So that's why a lot of people experience frustration with that process as well. So what we advocate for is a different approach. It's called warm networking, and it's part of our network into tech system. That's a bit more of our premium offer. We can discuss that later. But really, what this approach is you. This is you. Notice I haven't put hundreds of other people here. It's just you. And the whole goal is for you to locate employees working at your dream company in your dream role. Like, let's say your dream role is being a software engineer at Amazon, something like that. Your goal here is to locate lower level employees or higher level employees working your dream job and messaging them, either through like a LinkedIn, or if you have like an alumni database of emails that are available through your university, or you just know them through your own network. And the whole goal is to message them. And the whole goal of that purpose is to just have a conversation with them. It's not to immediately go jump down their throat and say, hey, I need a job, please hire me. The whole goal is to really provide value to them and learn about the role and learn about what they do and learn about how to best position yourself for such a role. Because people really don't want to just be like sold to. They don't really enjoy that process. they don't really want to be sold to or, forced to make a decision whether to refer you on. They really want to just be, have a networking conversation with them, a warm networking conversation. And then, if you have enough of these conversations and you maintain the relationship over a period of time and they get to know you, you can then ask them whether they would be willing to, you can say something like, hey, I'd love to learn more about the application process or what I can do and stand out in the heap of applicants. Would you mind, like, forwarding me to your hiring manager, or would you mind, like, whoever recruited you, would you mind introducing me so I can have a conversation with them? And then you have a conversation with the hiring manager. Again, the goal is not to be pushy and say, hey, please give me a job. The whole goal is to really just have a conversation with people, get to know about what's involved in working in a company. Just introduce yourself and just make yourself come off as knowledgeable and interested and, desirable for a particular role. And then the hiring manager then knows you. And they may know other hiring managers who are hiring at that particular moment. And then they may end up being your advocate within the company to help you get a role within that particular firm. So that's just how we approach it and how I've approached it. It's more about, finding the right people, turning them into advocates for you, and then eventually, over time, that can help you in, locating your job or locating your tech job. It just is, I'm not saying it's 100% a guarantee, but all I'm trying to point out here is just so much of a nicer way of approaching things. It's a more cleaner and efficient way of approaching things rather than just, spamming resumes and praying that someone picks your resume. I just find that, it's unproductive and quite frankly unfulfilling and not something that a person who's looking for a higher level job, necessarily wants to do. So, again, this brings me back to the concept of cold applying versus warm applying. And what cold applying is basically, like I said, spamming resumes. And the reason why this doesn't really work is because, first of all, it is low trust. The hiring manager has low trust in you. They have really fairly limited knowledge about you. They don't have much familiarity with you. And again, like I said, it is really hard to distinguish yourself. So you can see, you can think of this similar to just like having a cold call or sending cold emails, concepts like that. There's going to be a lot of rejection in that process because there's low trust. They don't really know you. For the most part, they really don't know you. And if they don't know you, like you, or trust you, they may not like you. They just don't really know you. So it's really hard for you to stand out and get picked. Versus warm applying, where, if you've spoken to the hiring manager in charge, they have higher trust in you, presumably, if you have a good conversation with them, which we talk about later. They have good familiarity with you. They have higher familiarity with you, good knowledge about you, and you can stand out a bit more in the application stack. Because then once your resume comes along, either it's been referred or you've been advocated for by someone else, then they know you. And they're more likely to say, hey, this is Sally, she spoke to me, maybe let's interview her. I'm not saying it's going to be a guarantee that it's going to happen, but it's just, your chances go up by just having more familiarity with the hiring manager. At least that's what I've experienced. And that's why I wanted to create this video, is to kind of help others with this process. So now that I've kind of discussed that, this goes into very similar concepts: resume spamming, for the most part, exhausting, low return rate, frustrating, low productivity, and pretty much a low likelihood of getting the dream role that you're looking for in tech. Versus warm networking, where it's interesting because you meet people who are working the roles. You get to learn about the company. You get to learn about the role. You get to meet interesting, important people. And even if nothing comes out of it and you don't get a job at that particular company, at least you've had a great conversation and you built your network. And your net worth at the end of the day is ultimately a result of networking. And that's the saying, right? Your network is your net worth. And it's much more fun. I find it to be way more fun and a lot more exciting and something that, you know, you feel interested in your job search rather than just, dreading it or thinking, oh my gosh, I have to do this painful job search today. If you come up with a clear plan surrounding networking, surrounding how you're going to approach the job hunt, and you reach out to the right people, it's just so much better. It's so much more fun, and there's just so much less frustration and exhaustion in the process. So, I've kind of talked about that, right? So, I want to go briefly. I have about 13 minutes here in my Vimeo recording. So, I just want to talk a little bit about what we teach in the Tech Biz Club and what our approach is for networking into tech. And we call it our, pretty fairly straightforward name, Networking into Tech System. And the first aspect of that system is coming up with a list of relevant roles and relevant companies that you actually might enjoy working for. So, for instance, let's say you're a product manager and you want to be a product manager. The important thing here is you actually pick out desirable roles that you might be interested that match your experience and your skill level. It is very hard for someone who has, for instance, a business degree to go and get a software engineering job right away because they don't have the right background. I'm not saying it's impossible, but, it is fairly hard. So if you look into job descriptions, job roles, and so forth, you can find like a certain list of roles that that people are offering or people have posted that match your experience and something you might be interested in. So, for instance, that might be a product analyst, a brand sales specialist, a business analyst, or so forth, if your dream role is, for instance, a product manager. And then you locate companies that are kind of offering your desirable role. I mean, these are kind of examples, but for instance, like Capital One might have a business analyst role, Google might have a product analyst role, IBM might have a brand sales role, and so forth. Really, the whole goal is to just locate companies that are offering your desirable role. And, these are just examples of companies, but all I'm trying to get to is these are kind of roles that you can be looking into for your particular dream role. Then the second stage is to locate people actually working your desirable role. You can find them on LinkedIn, or you have an alumni database, or you just have friends or working in industry if you're a bit older. They may be working these particular roles. Like, for instance, Sally may be a Capital One business analyst, or Steve may be an IBM brand sales specialist, so on and so forth. And you just reach out to them. And, the whole goal to reach out is not to tell them, I need a job, please hire me. The whole goal is to just say, like, hey, it's been a while. Let's have a conversation and catch up over coffee or something like that. It's really just to inculcate a bit more of a relationship, get to learn more about the company they're working for, how the role is, and so forth. There's plenty of scripts if you go and look up on Google, for instance, or ChatGPT, informational interviewing reach outs. You could find a lot of these simple scripts for approaching such a reach out. And then, you reach out to them through LinkedIn or something like that. If you manage to find their email through like an alumni database or something, you can reach out to them through their simple, polite message. And if they don't respond, a quick follow-up in a week. And if not, you move on and you find other people because there's tons of people working the roles you want to work. You just got to find them and reach out to them for the most part. And your goal is to just book conversations. Like, think that you're like a salesperson doing sales. The whole first step is to find people who are, you know, who your prospects, and just trying to book calls. Book conversations, and just get into the pipeline of things. Just get into the flow of getting these conversations with people who are working roles you want to have. And then this kind of flows into the next thing, which is having a good networking conversation. I see a lot of people who screw this up, because they approach it directly, and, rather than, the whole point of a networking conversation is to, be, having a networking conversation, right? It's not to pitch them and to close them and trying to get them to immediately refer your resume to someone else. Because for the most part, especially if they don't know you, you're cold traffic to them. If you think in terms of like marketing, you're cold to them. They don't really know you that well. So how can they advocate for you if they really don't know you? So the whole goal is to convey to them that you are trustworthy, you are likable, that you're a good person, that you might be a good employee. The whole goal is to convey that to them and be professional. So, of course, dress nicely, go into the conversation, and really, people love to talk about themselves. People really enjoy speaking about themselves, their background, who they are, and so forth. And so, really, through this conversation, the initial step is to just, have introductions. And if they ask you to tell me about yourself, then you tell them about yourself. Tell them about your background, who you are, where you came from, what you're interested in, what you want to do, and so forth. Build familiarity and trust. It's just so crucial. And then this comes into our second stage, which is basically, asking them questions, and, asking them things like, what do you enjoy about your job? What makes you excited when you go into work? What's your favorite part of the job? What are some challenges associated with the job? Your whole purpose is to come off as a good person who is trustworthy, who is credible, and who's someone they may want to advocate for in the future. You just come off bluntly and say, please, can you refer me to your hiring manager to give me a job? So out the gate, they're most likely going to just say no to you, because they don't really know you or, trust you that much, quite frankly. So the whole goal is to just come off as credible and trustworthy. And again, this is the second point, which is listening. Listening is such a crucial skill. We've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and, it's important to listen to them and ask them follow-up questions and prove to them that you've been engaging with them in the conversation. And, that just shows that you're professional and you're trustworthy. And that's just so important. You can see I'm kind of beating a dead horse here with the same theme of trustworthiness, but it's just so important. It's crucial. It's probably the most important part. And then you have the follow-up. And, I've kind of split this into 2 stages. This kind of depends on whether you're looking for more of a long-term approach to finding a job. Maybe you don't need a job right now, but you're maybe looking for like your dream tech role. Maybe you want to get it within the next 6 months or something like that. You can say something like, would you mind if we stay in touch? Would you mind if I followed up, or, let's stay in touch, something like that. And if it's a bit more of a shorter term approach and, you find that they like you, you can just say something like, if they're not directly the hiring manager, you can say something like, hey, I'm looking for a role right now. Would you mind if you is there any advice you would give me for the job search process, or is there any help that you might be able to provide for me? Something like that. But your whole goal is to not come off as needy. Is there any way you could introduce me to someone who can, kind of help me understand the application process? Stuff like that. You don't want to come off as needy. You more want to come off as interested in the company and interested in their application process. There's a certain tact and art to it. Again, you can look this up on ChatGPT too, and we also discuss it in our premium system where we work with people to help them with this kind of stuff. So that's kind of what our approach is basically very polite follow-ups. It's just a networking conversation. You just want to stay in touch with them. And the final thing is to create momentum and seal the deal. And I'm not saying you're necessarily going to get something through this approach, but this is just what I've found to be super helpful for me. And what I found to be super helpful for others is, you know, if you've had a long term relationship with them or even a short term relationship, just follow up and send things to them. Stay in touch. Ask them, how are you? How's your family? How, like, maybe send them some interesting blog posts or articles based off of the conversation that you had. And it's not a short term thing. You have to think about this kind of like a conveyor belt, right? You've had a conversation with them. That's stage one. Then you need to continuously, build the relationship, by having these follow ups. You don't need to ping them every single day, but things like sending articles, sending blog posts, asking them how they are, just building a relationship is just so important. These professional relationships are just crucial. And then once it gets to the point where you're looking for a particular role, then you have them like warmed up. Then they know who you are. They may trust you a bit more. They may like you a bit more. And then, what I think about in this case is like, is the role posted or not at their particular company? And then you can ask them, hey, I noticed this particular role is posted. Would you mind helping me? I'm super interested in it. Would you mind like referring me to the hiring manager if they know the hiring manager? Or would you mind like getting me in touch with someone? Again, the whole goal is to come off as polite. Don't force them into anything if they're not interested in it. It's just you can just ask the question, right? And they have the right to say yes or no. But I'm just saying there's more likelihood they would say yes if you've stayed in touch and you've had warm conversations with them and they know you a bit more. It's like getting a referral from a friend versus getting a referral from like someone you've barely met. There's a certain distinction in the likelihood of whether or not they give you a referral. And this is crucial. I mean, this is super important. If the role is not posted, and this can be there, especially if you're looking for a smaller company or something where they don't always post the role. And if you're looking for a particular role, just reach out. You can reach out to them and ask them whether they know roles in their company, right? If they're internal, especially if it's a smaller company, there's more likelihood that they may know of a role that's there that hasn't even been posted yet. And I've read a statistic that like a large chunk of roles are not even posted online. They're there. They're there, but they're not posted online. And that's a crucial element of the system we teach is, understanding these hidden roles, these hidden opportunities, which aren't always accessible immediately. And this kind of brings me to our final point. And I really hope you enjoyed this. We're going to be posting more videos like this in the future. And really the important final point is the bulk of jobs are gotten through networking. It is so hard to find a job through cold applying, spamming resumes. It sucks, it's painful, and it's just no fun. And a lot of roles are just found through warm networking. It's just so fundamentally important. And if you want to get help in your job search strategy and you want to get help like through Ask Me Anythings or something like that, we have a free private Reddit group. I'll put it in the description below. And you can ask personalized questions to me and my team through this through our AMA, the Ask Me Anything, in that we have these multiple times throughout the week. And if you want access to this community, we may post it, or if you want us to post it, we can actually please comment tech below so I know how much interest there is, and I'll be getting that to you. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you really enjoyed it.